he was not always a philosopher of history. He became a philosopher of history in 1809 in a clumsy fashion, we could say, in an exploratory fashion, in a confused fashion, deliciously confused, the Freedom essay is. And he really found his foothold in the topic in his lectures on the positive philosophy, which was the culmination of his career in 1831, at which point he endeavored to construct a philosophy of history that would supplant Hegel's. So up until then, he avoided the whole thing. And this is something that I think is important, and I want to go into it in some detail. He avoided the whole thing, and this was Schelling 1. Schelling 1 avoided the whole thing by being an idealist in the strict sense of the term. And for Schelling, an idealist in the strict sense of the term is one who pursues a purely rational philosophy to its logical culmination, which is the denial of eventful time. And he thinks that you see such denials in Plato and Plotinus, and he certainly develops them over the course of thousands of pages of pursuing this thesis. How did he get there? So a little brief run-up to Schelling's mature idealism through his nature philosophy. He became very famous as a young man for writing treatises on nature, one treatise after another, and they earned the recognition of many people, including Hegel, who wrote his first book on Schelling's nature philosophy, and Goethe, who said, this is so amazing, get this guy a job. So he became the youngest professor, I think, in the history of Germany up until recently, at the University of Vienna, because of his work on nature philosophy. And the project in nature philosophy was to counteract the dualism of modern philosophy. The dualism of modern philosophy, which you're familiar with, standard undergraduate stuff, that we can divide the world into subjects who are free, and spiritual, and immaterial, and objects which are necessary and material and over and against us. And on this side we have spirit, and on this side we have nature. Schelling weighed in on this debate. Whether or not this is accurately Cartesian or not is of no insignificance. It's simply the way we thought about it in the 18th century, and lots of us did. So Schelling weighed in on this debate, and he said there's something really wrong with this. And this was the romantic Schelling who enthused about the infinity of nature, who loved the wilderness and so on and so forth, and discovered his unconscious, and fell in love repeatedly, and all of that romantic stuff. Nature couldn't be just some spiritless, mechanical thing over and against free subjectivity. It had to have some of its own integrity. This is not a thought unique to Schelling. All the romantics argued this. They were all pals. They were in and out of each other's beds. Novalis, the Schlegel brothers, Carolina Schlegel, whom Schelling stole from his friend August Schlegel, married her. So they were all into this stuff. They had salons, and they listened to Beethoven and talked about nature, the infinity without, which is reflective of the infinity within, and so forth. But Schelling, being the smart fellow he was, made it a logical point, and his thesis was the following, that if we properly understand these two things, we can say spirit equals nature, but not in a simple tautological sameness. Rather, to use a biological term, they are stereoisomers. They are like mirror images of each other. Everything that's on the left on the one side is on the right on the other side, like two hands, which are similar but reversed. And Schelling got very specific about what's reversed here. Or as he would put it, and he put it in many ways, but the way that's most helpful for us is that what's implicit in spirit is explicit in nature. And what's implicit in nature is explicit in spirit, sort of kind of play of inside and outside. In the more famous formulation, he said that spirit is invisible nature, and nature is visible spirit. Of course, we could talk for a long time about that, but think basically about ideality. So I know the properties of plants. They take up residency in my soul, to speak in an Aristotelian fashion. But those properties of plants, the essences of plants, they're not on the surface of the plant. In the metaphysical sense, these essences are what's most concealed and most interior in the material beings, in natural beings. So that hidden interiority of the natural being becomes the exterior of the mind. It's what's most visible in a certain way to mind, which doesn't mean to say that it has a material visibility. It's not materially visible, but it's what's most on the surface. And similarly, the spirit is not entirely transparent to itself, but beneath it is churning with all of the forces which are visibly manifest in nature: contraction and expansion, drive and struggle and strife. All of this is the deep ground of spirit, which is, of course, the unconscious. And this was the beginning of the concept of the unconscious.